We're continuing our discussion of the law of demand. Now, if you watched the first little clip, you saw that introduction that kind of mirrored the discussion you found in our textbook, where we learned that the law of demand deals very specifically with price and quantity demanded. So the follow-up question from my students is always this: well, what's the difference? What's the difference between demand and quantity demanded? I get the idea of the law of demand. $5 for a 12-pack of Coke, that was my example. $4 for a 12-pack of Coke. What's the difference? The difference is this. Demand talks about things that, when changed, really cause us to alter our buying habits. We either spend much, much more, or we spend much, much less. And it doesn't really matter what the price of the product is. If demand goes up, our authors tell us that we're going to buy more at every possible price out there. If demand goes down, we're then going to buy much less at every possible price out there. 5 determinants of demand were discussed by our authors, and I'm going to break this up into a couple of short little discussions. In your reading, you found these topics: income, taste, price of related goods, expectations, number of buyers. These are the things that our authors highlighted in this particular discussion. I'm going to cover a couple real quick here, and we'll do another couple in the next segment. So, demand. When demand changes, we are either going to be able to spend much, much more, or we're going to find ourselves spending much, much less at every possible price. Let's begin with one that I think is always very easy for us to see. Income. Income goes up, demand is going to go up. Think about that for just a moment. If I were lucky enough to have my supervisor call me in the office and go, "Hey Greg, you're doing a great job, we're giving you a pay raise," I'm here to tell you, Katie bar the door, I'm buying more of everything. If we have more money, we're going out for more dinners, we're watching more movies, we're renting more DVDs, you're buying more pairs of jeans because you've got more money. Now, if I was unfortunate, if the opposite were to happen, if my supervisor were to someday realize that I'm a schmuck, he'd call me into his office and say, "Listen, Greg, we've had all the fun we can have with you. Thanks for everything. You're done." Well, now I have no money coming in. And you know what happens then. Really doesn't matter what the price of a product is. If you have no money, you're buying less of everything. All right, so that's the basic explanation for income as a determinant of demand. Now let's look at the big difference that we see when we go to graph those changes. If you'll recall from our discussion about the law of demand, we had one demand curve, and we talked about changes in price as they related to a very specific quantity. When we showed that in picture form, we talked about it as a movement along the curve. And that's a term that I told you to look for when you get ready to deal with those multiple choice questions. Now, as we talk about a change in demand, we're going to see a big difference, right? We're going to see people spending much, much more, or people pulling back and spending much, much less. So our initial discussion talked about the law of demand. We had surveyed an individual, come up with very specific price and quantity demanded combinations, and we plotted this demand curve. We label this D1 because it's the first demand curve that we talked about. So let's look at what happens when a person's income increases. You get a big pay raise, you win the lottery, congratulations, you've got more money to spend. When that money comes in and you start spending all that extra money, really isn't going to matter what the price of a particular item is. You're going to buy more at every possible price. An increase in demand is described as a shift right of the demand curve, or some people will talk about it as a shift outward, a shift away from the origin. The origin is where those two axes, the X and Y axes, come together. When I think of it as you see it here on the board. You're looking at this board and you can see demand increase by shifting from here to the right over there. Now technically, if we were to look at this new demand curve, you could see how much more was being purchased. At $1 originally, we were buying 50 of these in a month. Now at $1, it's way off the chart, probably somewhere around 80. $5 originally, if we were going to buy Coke, we'd buy maybe 10 of these 12 packs. Now at $5, if you follow this point down, you're buying 30. At $4, we used to buy 20. Now at $4, we're buying 50. So at every possible price out there, we're buying more. What happens when income goes down? You know what happens when income goes down? We're not going to buy as much. This curve then is the curve that shows a decrease in demand. We talk about that as a shift left. And again, think of it as you look toward the board here. We started with this initial demand curve. Now demand has dropped, and we talk about it as a shift left. And again, it really tells us that at every possible price, people are willing and able to purchase less. At $1, originally we'd been purchasing 50 of these things. Now at $1, we're only buying 40. At $2, we had been buying 40 12-packs. Now at $2, we're only buying 30. So again, we could follow that on through, but when demand decreases, people buy less at every possible price. So that's a good starting point. Income. Income is a determinant of demand. The basic relationship is this. When income rises, demand is going to increase. We show that as a shift right of the demand curve. When income drops, we're going to show a decrease in demand, and that's drawn as a shift left of the curve. Next thing our authors talked about. Our authors talked about how our tastes influence what we buy and what we don't buy out there. And I'm always amazed at how powerful our preferences are. You can kind of think of it sometimes in terms of how popular something is. When something becomes more preferable, more popular, we're going to buy much, much more at every possible price. When something becomes less popular, less preferable, doesn't matter what the price is, we're not going to buy as much of that. Think of big action-packed movies, and something becomes popular. Like my daughter, she's a big fan of this Twilight series. Don't understand it, but she loves it, and so do millions of other people out there. And I'm telling you that you could put one of those Twilight characters on a rock, and people would buy that stuff because the movie's such a big, popular hit. Doesn't really matter what the price is, we're going to buy more and more of it. When my son was young, these Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were popular. I don't know if some of you will remember this or not. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we had turtle everything. You know, Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello, Michelangelo. We had socks, and we had shoes, and we had shirts, and we had everything, and it really didn't matter what the price was. If it had a picture of a turtle on it, people were buying it. All right, we would say demand increases. That would be a shift to the right. Conversely, when things fall out of favor, it doesn't really matter what the price is, people aren't going to buy as much. A couple examples that I always think of relate to the car industry. At one time, the Audi 5000 was this hugely popular car. The Audis, you know what they are? They have the rings on them, look kind of like Olympic circles. Anyhow, the ritzy-foofy people who made millions of dollars had the Audi 5000. They were the ones with the $3 million homes, 5-car garage, pool in the backyard. And these things sold like hotcakes. They would hit a dealer's lot, stay there 2 minutes, and then be sold for more than sticker. Well, all of a sudden, we found that the Audi had a bit of a problem. People would be coming home at the end of the day, and they'd be driving into their garage, and the gas pedal would stick down, and they'd go right through the garage and out into the pool. You know, and the pool guy would be going, ah! And there'd be people swimming around, and they would just drive down the block, and the gas pedal would stick, and they'd take off, and they'd, ah! And it went from the place where people were buying these things to the place where nobody would touch them. Now, this has been about 20 years ago, so let's flash forward to a more current example. Wasn't that long ago that Toyota had the same problem. Do you remember this in the news? They had gas pedals that were just sticking down. Somebody had been just bopping along the highway doing 50 miles an hour, and all of a sudden they were just like in a NASCAR race. That gas pedal would stick down, they'd be doing 100 miles an hour, and Toyotas went from the place where everybody and their brother was buying them to the place where nobody would touch them. Well, at every possible price, people were buying less. We would say that demand decreased. So an increase when something is preferable, something is favorable, shift right. A decrease, something falls out of favor, a shift left. All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to cover a couple other determinants of demand.